My name is Boris Iskra. I'm with Forest and Wood Products Australia and support WoodSolutions. So I'll focus on basically the compliance pathways for the use of internal timber linings in both commercial and public buildings. So we all know that the beauty and the warmth that are provided by timber products, and particularly in commercial type buildings, in foyers in particular, can have quite a dramatic impact with people walking into that facility or the building. But one of the key considerations is compliance. So during my presentation today, I'll look at the compliance pathways with the National Construction Code. I'll also go through the National Construction Code 2019 edition in terms of the requirements for internal timber products. I'll also got in blue italics, many of you will be aware that the National Construction Code will be released or has been nominated to be formally adopted as of the 1st of May 2023. But as I go through the presentation, I'm putting up the clauses in the NCC 2022 so that we can start to get familiar with them, because there have been some minor changes to some of the clause numbers. And then talk about the evidence of suitability documentation that is available via the WoodSolutions website. So what I'll focus on is National Construction Code Volume 1. So Volume 1 focuses on commercial style buildings, which include sort of the apartments, hotels, offices, etc. And the National Construction Code is broken down to a number of areas that require compliance, from structural design, fire resistance, access and egress, etc. So today's focus will be on the fire requirements of the National Construction Code. Under the National Construction Code, there are two key pathways. You can do combinations, but we'll just try and keep it simple at this stage and just talk about the compliance solutions pathways. So predominantly there are two pathways, the performance solution pathway or the deemed to satisfy solution pathway. What I'll do today is focus on the deemed to satisfy. So basically what deemed to satisfy means is that you follow the recipe that's nominated under the National Construction Code and you can have automatic approval. The performance solution pathway is when you engage a design professional, in this case would be, say, a fire safety engineer, to undertake an analysis for you to provide an alternative or a performance solution. So what forms of evidence of suitability are there? There's a range of options that are available under the National Construction Code. One of those is having a code mark certificate provided for the product. So there's a certificate of conformity that's issued by code mark, and basically that will dictate the product, its use, the application. So it'll literally define how that product can be used in order to meet the performance requirements of the National Construction Code. There's also an ability to obtain a certificate of accreditation. In Victoria, which is where I'm based, we have a Building Regulation Advisory Committee that can issue these types of certificates, which also are acceptable under National Construction Code. There's also certificates that aren't issued by either CodeMark or this other or another accreditation body that can be issued by a certification body. There's typically someone like JANZ can issue the Joint Australian-New Zealand certification body that can issue such a document. Now, from a product perspective and WoodSolutions, one of the key pathways that WoodSolutions undertake is getting a report issued by an accredited testing laboratory, and that laboratory will undertake test work and then combine all the findings of that test work into a report. You can look to also get certificates or a report from a professional engineer. I suppose I'm thinking here also having such a fire safety engineer or some other engineer provide a documented report using the National Construction Code performance requirements and showing how the building design can meet that. And also there are product technical statements that are also being issued by companies that have products. So again, these product technical statements will describe the product, describe how it's manufactured, in accordance with what standard, how it's to be used, and then giving you that sort of evidence that that product can be used in a particular application. So there's sort of the key pathways under the National Construction Code. As I mentioned, WoodSolutions through Forest and Wood Products Australia basically undertakes test work that's then reviewed by the accredited testing laboratory and compiled into a technical report. These fire test reports are available on the WoodSolutions website under that web link. And again, I suppose one of the easiest ways to find things is because it's such a large website, if you put fire test reports into the search box and hit search, the first or second link will come up and it'll take you to these reports. So that's from a WoodSolutions perspective, this is where we provide the information to make it publicly available and accessible. So now if we start to focus on the actual products themselves. So if we look at the National Construction Code in terms of internal linings for walls and ceilings and floor properties, under the NCC, they're under clause C110 nominates what fire hazard properties are required for materials in order to comply. And then there's a couple of specifications that then provide the actual detail as to what you need to meet under a deemed to satisfy pathway to comply with the clause requirements. As you see down the left-hand side there, I've got the new clauses in blue for your information, but just be aware that we should now start to get used to the new NCC in preparation for its call up next year. So just to give you a quick rundown or run through the process. So the first thing you do is you look at the class of building. If it's a class 1 building, which is our traditional residential house, there are no fire requirements for the internal use of timber products for those types of buildings. So there are no clause requirements. So the volume 1 focuses on the class 2 to 9 buildings. But one thing to be aware of, not all elements or all timber elements need to achieve a particular fire hazard property. There are a number of them that don't require to meet the provisions. So elements such as timber frame windows, a solid timber handrails or skirting boards, a solid timber core door or a fire door, any joinery, cupboard, shelving, etc. And paints, varnishes, or adhesives also do not meet to a specific requirement under the NCC. Now, if we break it down to the specific products, so if we're looking at a covering type product such as flooring, wall and ceiling linings, under specification C110, there are a number of clauses that give you the requirements, so clauses 3, 4, and 6. So I'll go through those in a moment. And then there's also another fire hazard industry area that I won't touch on a lot today, which sort of gives other applications such as attachments to buildings that might need to achieve a certain performance. But as I say, I'm predominantly going to focus on the floor, wall, and ceiling lining applications. So if we're looking at a floor, what are the flooring requirements or for that for the fire hazard properties? So one of the first questions you need to ask yourself is the building sprinkled? If it is, the property that you're looking for is a critical radiant flux value. If the building is not sprinkled, then you need to achieve the critical radiant flux value as well as a smoke development rate. So I suppose what that's saying is, okay, if we don't have a sprinkler system, there's a chance that a material will continue to burn, and we want to limit the amount of smoke that's developed under this criteria. For wall and ceiling applications, so clause 4, again, is our building sprinkled or not? If it is sprinkled, this time we need a group number. So floors, we need the critical radiant flux. For walls and ceilings, we need a group number. However, if the building is not sprinkled, we need both a group number as well as a smoke growth rate index or the average specific extinction area. Now, the reason there are two different properties listed there depends on the test. And I'll go through those test methods in a moment, but just, I suppose the main thing to be aware of is that you need a group number, plus there'll be some focus on the amount of smoke that's produced as part of that test. But also under clause 6, there is provision there for lift cars. So again, if it's a floor, there's a critical radiant flux value that needs to be achieved. And for the wall and ceiling linings, there's also a particular group number to be achieved. So look, take a bit of a snapshot of that in your minds. That's basically the flow of the NCC and how you determine what type of criteria you need to achieve. So now I'll focus on wall and ceiling linings. There is a particular test that's called up, and I'm focusing here on timber. So there's a cone calorimeter test, which is basically a bench scale sized piece of equipment under the Australian New Zealand standard NZS 3837, which nominates the test procedure. We can use this for natural timber products. Now, the reason I've got the word natural in there is that once you start to apply any form of treatment to it, such as a fire retardant treatment, you need to then demonstrate that there is a correlation between this test method, the bench scale, and a room burn test, which I'll get to in a moment. But for natural timber products, there is a defined or an accepted correlation between the bench scale test and a full room burn test. So from the cone calorimeter test, there's a range of properties or a range of outcomes that are achieved from the test. The key criteria that we're looking for are heat release rates from the test, as well as the average specific extinction area. Under the NCC, there's a table 3 under specification C 1.10. We've basically pulled that table together to make it a bit easier to see on one page. But I'll just focus just briefly on class 2 buildings, just to get a feel for the use of the group numbers and the NCC. So for class 2 buildings, which are our residential style apartment buildings, as I mentioned earlier, you first need to look at whether or not your building is sprinklered or not. If the building doesn't have sprinkler protection, then the NCC provides a range of group numbers that need to be achieved in specific areas. So if we're looking at the exits or the fire isolated exits and any fire control rooms, there's a required group number 1. When we move into public corridors for walls and ceilings, it's a group number 1 or 2. And then if we go to a specific area, then we have for walls and ceilings that can be group numbers 1, 2, or 3. And then any other area is 1, 2, or 3. Now, I'll define those in a moment, but just to show you the flavour as to how the NCC is structured. And then if the building is sprinklered, again, the fire isolated exits and fire control rooms have a group number 1. You'll see that with the introduction of the sprinkler systems, we can now introduce group 3 materials in public corridor use in apartments, and the rest of the requirements remain the same. So as you can see, with the introduction of sprinklers provides some benefit where you can utilise, have a greater range of materials that can be used in certain applications. So what do these specific areas mean? So you can see here for class 2 buildings and 3, it's defined as the occupancy or the sole occupancy unit. So if for a class 2 building, it's the apartment. There are other areas defined as specific for other classes of buildings that are provided in the NCC. So just be aware of that table, what specific areas mean. And if there's some other area that's not defined as a fire isolated exit or a public corridor or a specific area, then that's another area. So therefore you use that range of options under the column there. So from the timber appearance product perspective and group numbers, On the WoodSolutions website, there'll be a number of reports that are issued. This first report has got fire hazard properties for plywood used for internal walls and ceilings. It does refer to this AS 5637.1. That's a classification standard, and that tells the accredited testing laboratory as to how to assign, in this instance, a group number. So we have a test method standard, and then we have a classification standard. So under the reports online, you see that the report will give a bit of a summary as to what the report provides. So in the first instance, it's a group number with the average specific extinction area, but also then in this case assesses a range of different glue types under that for use with plywood. And one of the other things I'll just highlight is that we've got the details as to up until what date is that report valid. So that's so that you've got confidence that that report is up to date. If there are any changes to the reports, we will then place them online. So I'll just suggest that prior to doing any finalisation of specification, please just check the WoodSolutions website to ensure that you've got the most current report. There's also reports available online. In this instance, where we've got timber veneers put on some sort of substrate. In this case, could be a medium density fiberboard or a plywood type substrate. And again, this report will also provide advice as to what types of glues can be used, and again, valid up to what point or up to what date. So within these reports, it will basically list a range of species that are being tested and provide a minimum thickness and a group number, as well as the average, in this case, the average specific extinction area requirement in terms of what these timber products achieve. After having done a whole host of test work over the decades, and also looking at what's happening around the world, and looking at test results that have been found, one of a simple hint is that if your timber species has a density of around about 400 kilograms per cubic meter or greater, and it has a 9mm thickness, it typically achieves a group 3. So that's probably more from a design and thinking about what materials can I use. Anything above 400 kilograms per cubic meter, you're going to tend to be okay. But before you go specifying anything, just make sure that you have a copy of the assessment report so that your species is nominated there. I have had issues in the past or comments made in the past. People have specified things and unfortunately haven't been in our assessment reports. So please check those reports before you formalise any final specification. But just quickly in terms of the test methods, so AS NZS 3837 has some characteristic limitations. So basically they take a sample, put it in their machine, they look at any surface irregularities, and they have some defined limits as to what sort of variations can be there. They look at what sort of, if there are any cracks or any holes in that sample. So they've got some provisions or requirements around that. If you don't meet those sorts of requirements, then the bench scale test isn't appropriate and it requires a full scale test. So I suppose looking at types of products and holes that can be there or any sort of gaps. So typically these acoustic panels need to be looked at in that regard. So prior to any test work, the supplier or the manufacturer would just need to have an accredited testing laboratory assess their product to determine whether or not the bench scale test is appropriate or it needs to go to a full scale test. If it does need to go to a full scale test, there's a room burn that's undertaken. So it's basically the size of a room, and there's a fireplace in a corner, and then the walls are lined and the ceiling is lined with the material. So basically it basically is a systems test. This is where if there are any gaps in your installation, I'm thinking of the product, so there's any gaps or holes in it, it'll be what's the backing behind that product, how's it been installed, and then once that test is done, the accredited testing laboratory will provide a report to the manufacturer or the product supplier, and it'll say if your product is installed like this and has these characteristics, this is the performance it would achieve. So before any testing is done, and this is probably going out to any of the manufacturers, work closely with the laboratory just to make sure that you cover off on your product and how it will be installed, so you can get the desired outcome from the test. Now, just moving on to flooring products. There's a different test. It's an international standards test that's used here in Australia. Basically, the product is put on horizontally as part of this test procedure with a radiant panel. And then it's exposed to a critical heat flux, and it looks at what that heat flux is at the point of extinction of any combustion. And it also measures the sort of smoke that's emitted during the test. So how does the NCC use that information? For floor linings and coverings, there's a table within the specification C 1.10, and you'll see on that table, if we're looking at, again, focusing on class 2 buildings, so an apartment type building, it'll again, so it breaks it down, is the building, does it have an automatic sprinkler system? If it's not fitted with one, you need to achieve a higher performance, so a minimum value of 2.2 kilowatts a square meter on that product. If it is fitted with a sprinkler system, you can have that product performance at 1.2 kilowatts a square meter. And then also nominate in fire isolated exits what that critical radiant flux requirement is. So that's why it's important to know that obviously the type of building, sprinkled or unsprinkled, which then give you the performance of the materials that you're after, or that you need to achieve in order to comply with the NCC. So again, for timber appearance grade products, there's a number of reports on the WoodSolutions website. In this case, we have for solid timber flooring, up with a minimum thickness of 12 mil, or plywood with a 15 mil thickness, and tested in accordance with that room burn type setup. And so this particular report provides the critical radiant flux value as well as this smoke development rate. And again, the date to which that report is valid. And again, for other types of products, for flooring type products, in this case, they'll be slightly thicker. So it's a 19 mil flooring thickness with, again, a range of critical radiant flux values and the smoke development rate. So as an example, within one of the reports, it'll have the flooring option. In this case, there is a slight difference between flooring that's installed on a substrate or not. So you can imagine during the test, if there's a burn through the timber flooring, it can then come from underneath and keep that burning, or potentially accentuate that burning. So our reports actually are broken down into flooring products that are installed on, say, on with an air gap beneath or over a substrate. So depending on the table or the way you're going to use that product, you can look up your species, and it'll give you the performance, in this case of 12 mil or greater, and the performance that that flooring product achieves. So that's sort of just a quick run through as to the requirements under the National Construction Code. There's a range of fire reports that are available on the WoodSolutions website, and these fire reports or assessment reports provide that evidence of suitability. So we do have a range of reports on the WoodSolutions website from these appearance grade type products for building, also building elements. So if you're building multi-story timber framed buildings, we've got fire test reports for that, as well as for building systems. So we've got those available on the WoodSolutions website. So look, I'd like to thank you for your time as part of my presentation. And now I'd like to hand over to Barnaby. So I'll just stop sharing my presentation and I'll hand over to Barnaby, and Barnaby can take you through his presentation. Thanks, Barnaby.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Boris. And I'd like to thank WoodSolutions for inviting Scott Form on this presentation today. we're excited to be sharing with you information about our company, and the intent of the presentation is to help in the area of specifying walls and ceilings that will in turn unleash unlimited design potential. So our motto and mission really is to make beautiful designs buildable. We see ourselves as an enabler for architects. A design has to be built to survive the commercial process by meeting approvals, surviving value management, and being able to be built to quality. Sculptform is inspired by Lego and the simple Lego brick that was developed in the 1950s, as well as many other pioneering products, as well as Apple and the simplicity that they've created around their products, which we are endeavoring to do in the architectural landscape. So the clip connection in front of you is really the nucleus of all our products. We're huge on connections, concealed fixing, modularity. Our patented click-on connection enables a combination of aesthetics along with strong structural capabilities, with buttons and cladding being able to be pre-indexed on tracks so you get precise on-site setup. Design possibilities. Starting with a high-level view, what are the design possibilities with sculptural features, and what can we learn from past work of others? So here we have a configuration which was designed by Fender Catalytis at the 20 Bond Street lobby. It's a curved bulkhead within a large lobby space, and it looks absolutely amazing, but it's relatively simple to design and achieve on any project that you may have coming up, which we'll run through further. So here's some shop drawings or some cross-sectional details of that bulkhead. And the practical consideration here is showing an access hatch coming out of the ceiling, which is completely concealed. This shows how ply forms behind the feature wall can be incorporated into the structure of the bulkhead, allowing our tracks to run up the ply forms and then therefore click into our battens, making it a super simple install and a very effective look. So here we have it in a bit more detail in the installation process. You can see on the left the ply forms coming to life and the tracks being applied to the substrate, and then the battens clicked in to the track, creating the bulkhead on the right. So here's a absolutely amazing project in Adelaide, Her Majesty's Theatre. Some of you may have been and seen it in person. It was designed by Cox Architecture. The project was simply our button and track modular system, super easy to install, and really creates the or displays the effective use of integrated lighting into timber and into your project. So the product serves a very important acoustic purpose in this project. As you can see, they've achieved the design by using various depths of battens, which looks great and is super achievable on any project. Obviously, there was a little bit of work on the design and set out side of things, to make it all run smoothly on site. But using our system, it is super simple to set out and creates an amazing effect using timber. Here we have the Christchurch Convention Centre, created by Woods Bagot and Warren Amani. The lead designer at Woods Bagot, Bruno, wanted to produce a project where his design thinking was around convex curves, creating a wine barrel look. And over 50,000 lineal meters of timber were used. The photos don't do it justice, and there's more timber than the eye can see on this one. So how did we do it? Originally, Bruno was thinking of using veneer, which would have taken a lot of custom joinery and been a very expensive exercise. So in order to follow the wine barrel theme, we used their curving track and battens. The original design they were achieving was creating these forms using a steel structure. So the cost of engineering, let alone the weight, was huge. We rationalized and provided an option where we created ply forms behind to create these shapes and allow the mounting tracks to be fixed back to these ply forms. So what practical function does it serve? Aside from looking beautiful, integrating with interior architecture and space, what practical function does it need to serve? What is the job that the feature wall or ceiling is doing? Is it purely decorative, or is it serving a practical purpose? So here we have a project which is Parramatta Square, designed by Woods Bagot. Importantly here, the structural balustrade is serving as a crowd barrier, needing to meet crowd loadings. There's quite a lot of collaboration and coordination which was required on this project to pull in the engineering requirements all together, as well as making the project still look amazing with timber and being able to be manufactured to a cost-effective rate. We've now developed this product a bit further. It was more the catalyst, you might say, in a whole new range for us, which is now click on screens, which is all C3 crowd loading. So if you've got a it's amazing what timber can be used for. I'm sure there's a few in the audience today that might recognise this sign. It was definitely a beacon of hope for many during the tough days of COVID. But it was designed by Grimshaw Architects in the Melbourne Airport International's Arrivals Terminal T2. And it serves another purpose other than looking beautiful. In this case, the expansive illuminated timber sign, spelling the words Melbourne, provides a warm welcome for incoming travellers into the city of Melbourne and really displays the effectiveness of integrated lighting, cleverly incorporated into a batten, spelling out the city name. It was required, there was quite a lot of coordination and collaboration on this one, but has really, I would say, shown itself fourfold in the effectiveness of integrated lighting into your project. Here we also have weatherability. So this is the Maribong estate, designed by Hopkins Clark. and really shows a different side of things for us in exterior facades. And there's a lot of compliance, as we know, regarding exterior environments, and is something that we have definitely pioneered into, and doing a lot of work with our aluminium products. And in this one, there is requirements for UV resistance, color retention, waterproofing, and thermal ratings. So it's something that can be overcome, still using a beautiful timber look, you might say, and serving a technical purpose more than just being a pretty face. So here we will have 5 typical configurations. So the first configuration is one-dimensional curves. This project is Eagle House, designed by IA Design. This project was a little more complex, but is a really fantastic looking foyer and demands a lot of attention. But you'd be happy to know it's not as complex to specify as it looks. Due to the one-dimensional curves, the ceiling curves upwards and then flattens out over the top of the walkway. The junction between the curved ceilings and the curved wall and the ceiling, is fairly simple. The wall they've specified using curving track, which we do offer and makes it very handy in curving sections on any project, with the timber battens running horizontally that are being curved to offer more flexibility to mold to the walls. Here we have Arcadia, which was designed by DKO and Breathe Architecture. More sculptural forms and more complex, really. It was 3D modeled, but with a degree of rationality in it. There is one form that carries on almost all the way through the arch and is almost extruded at the top, which then intersects. Our pre-construction team were heavily involved in making this design buildable, and shop drawings were also provided. Prototypes were also, in the early stages, designed to make sure the accuracy of the design was achievable. We provided the twisted substrate to site, where it was then attached to the steel support structure. 3D curves are definitely a lot more complex, but with the extra detail, it's really, really worth it. Arcadia has generated international acclaim and won multiple awards. Here we have a demonstration of balustrades. This is the Blackfriars Priory School, designed by Swanbury Penglaze in Adelaide. Here you can see how they've incorporated the balustrade into the wall to create an integrated feel with the open screens. The timber battens are altering in depth and have really been used to create texture and openness throughout the space. Here we have an example of stacked ceilings. So this is Shape Head Office, designed by Siren Design. And it's really a custom design where Siren were wanting to show greater mass of timber battens with the generous use of timber in the space. Excuse me. As you exit the lift, this is where you're greeted with a layer of textured timber batten ceiling, achieved by using timber dowels which are slotted into each batten. The detail here is that it thickens at the edge, and towards the middle of the ceiling it gets one layer dense. We applied a grid point on the ply ceiling behind, which is then attached to the suspended ceiling structure. We then pre-mounted the battens on dowels off-site, pinning it through the dowel to achieve this multi-depth look. Here we have an absolutely amazing project, which is the Hunter House Cafe designed by Fender Katsoulitis. It's an excellent example of 3D modeling and the effect that it can have. This can now be achieved through Grasshopper scripting, as there's a lot of data involved in making this possible. The spectacular parametric ceiling uses Sculptform custom solution manufactured in conjunction with Porter Moldings to deliver on this ambitious concept using hanging dowels to create a dynamic feature, using the texture of big ash on this project. So what are some vital practical considerations? Excuse me. So fire is a massive thing to consider in any project, and the fire code will dictate what material can be used and where. E.g., can you use steam vent battens, or will you have to stick to aluminium? So it's a really big deal. We do, for Group 1 applications, we can use timber, but it does require a intumescent coating, which we do advise people to get in touch with us early and definitely be consulting your fire engineer on your project. So what are the structural considerations that you need to consider on your project? So really, to keep front of mind, consider what other forces are going to be applied to the surface you're designing with, such as wind loads. Consider the wind pressure and effect that it can have on the connections. And it's something that really should be kept front of mind, as well as system spans and how far the fixings have been allowed to take the weight loads. Corrosion is another factor that needs to be considered in the environment that you're building in. Considering fixings and dissimilar metals throughout the project, as well as seismic, considering how the design will respond in earthquake events, as well as I know there is a lot of work that needs to be done around wind loads, especially in Northern Australia, that need to be kept front of mind as well. Another thing that needs to be considered is around, I know for high commercial areas, balustrades and full protection requirements. So what really are the engineering loads that need to be considered on this project? So we have a really cool tool in Price and Spec, which really is on the front of designing within your budget constraints, because we all know that budget is a massive factor on projects, and has really been highlighted in the last couple of years. And this tool is super simple and allows you to quickly envisage your budget and specify projects very easily. It's simply a drag and drop tool, which can create your custom feature wall or ceiling, receiving real-time pricing, specification data, and 3D views. It also gives a lot of information around NRC, which I know is a big thing in theatre and that kind of those kinds of projects. So really envisage your budget early, and it allows you to specify from a range of products. The last one is service integration. So another thing to really keep front of mind is thinking about air conditioning, fire sprinklers, lighting, access hatches. These services are going to need to be integrated into your feature wall or ceiling. So it's best to think about it upfront and early to make it as seamless as possible. The beauty in design considers details, and architects and interiors are well trained at this. And it's what sets a good design apart. There's no one size fits all, but we definitely have there's something to be considered for all projects. So now I'll quickly run over the specification process. So first up, we recommend you mud map it. Then think about the practical considerations, render your dream, then engage us to ensure your design is buildable, which is a very critical step. Collaborate to solution design, prototyping, sampling, client involvement and experimentation. Document the solution and attend to the details. So with mud mapping, it's really the simple sketches that get the imagination going and can be super powerful when designing with any product. Here is a mud map that Woodsbaggett came up with for our own studio, and really shows what can be achieved. Every great concept has really started on the back of a train ticket. So let yourself go wild. And we love this sort of thing, and we love helping create a design and make it buildable, and looking at the finished product, it really inspires us. Next, we have render your dream. So here's an example of a project where they've looked at using a product to simply cover up some structural elements on the project, but yet creating a beautiful, vibrant timber atmosphere on this project, and really bring it to life through a simple element, as in concealing structural elements. Next, we really do recommend that you collaborate with us, and we love collaborating with our customers, and looking at renders and rationalizing it, bringing it to life. And if you're, we can either do that virtually, or if you're in the Melbourne area or Victoria, feel free to book online for a session at our studio. Finally, we have Rhino to Revit. So really, these elements from our collaboration session can provide you, we can provide you with the tools for you to develop your design and documentation solution. And you should have all these things ready to go to then document and specify the products that you're looking for on your project to make it vibrant and come to life. And you know that it's then buildable. Yeah, that concludes my presentation, and I'd just like to thank everyone for coming, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be on here.
Okay, Barnaby, I might just go through it. We've got a few minutes left, so we can run through a couple of quick questions. So one question from Harrison, I suppose is more to myself, is what's the difference between the smoke development rate and the smoke growth rate index? Look, it's basically from the test. So the bench scale test will basically give you the smoke development rate. The room burn will give you that smoke growth rate index. So it's basically based on the test that will give you different, both about smoke, but they get just different values. So the NCC does permit you to use the values depending on what test method you've used. I might pass this one. I've got one for you, Barnaby, about the Adelaide project. And I'll just read out this from Jerry, saying the Adelaide project looks great. How did you go with the special trade skills required to undertake this specialist work? Any special training available or being undertaken or developed?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. The simple answer is what the beauty is behind our product is it's very simple in practicality, in that it's only all it is a mounting track, then we have acoustic panel and then the timber batten. A lot of work does get done behind the scenes with the set out, etc. And we kind of do it to when it gets to site. It is super simple to install. In terms of specialist and training, we didn't provide it, in that the subcontractor that we were dealing with on this project was really all over our product and it made it super simple for him to.
Right. Okay. All right. Look, thanks, Barnaby. Another question is probably one for me, a question from Stuart about would increasing the density of timber to 900 kilograms per cubic metre or greater increase the group number achieved, in our opinion. Look, there's no simple answer to that. It's basically a test is required. Under our assessment report, there are some species with really high densities that don't go up a group number. They remain at group 3. So there's no simple answer. Sorry, I should say no simple answer. Let me take that back. Untreated timber is basically group 3. A fire retardant type treated timber can be group 2. And then Barnaby saying that they've got some additional stuff to get them to group 1. But regardless, you do need to have some documentation. So that evidence of suitability is very important, so that you don't end up installing something and then this building certifier or surveyor saying, I don't accept it because you don't have the required documentation. So that's probably the better way to answer is that timbers are basically group 3, some sort of modified timber with a fire retardant or something, which you still need a report for, is typically like a group 2, and then some other systems can achieve group 1. So again, go to the supplier to get the relevant documentation. Look, we've just hit time there, so I can't unfortunately get to any other questions. But just to run out today's webinar. So as I mentioned earlier, there are previous recordings of our webinars that are available on the WoodSolutions website. Again, just going through the events tab and to the webinars, and the webinar series will pop up there, so you can select and view the ones you wish to. And just a bit of a heads up, the next webinar will be in a fortnight's time. It's going to be a case study of the Scion Innovation Hub in New Zealand. And the presenter will be Richard Nash, who will be taking us through, and the structure looks fantastic. So look forward to seeing you at the next webinar in a fortnight's time. And I hope you have enjoyed today's webinar and have a good day. Thank you.